We're pivoting to Agile. Your brother will take over as CEO. You'll provide operational support. I didn't say a word. My name is Lucas Rowe, 39 years old, Senior Operations Director at Rowe Industrial Group. I started in this company before I had a college degree, and long before my brother had a tie that fit. I redesigned the routing logic that saved us $4 million in fuel, built vendor networks from nothing during the shortage, and when the union talks almost collapsed in 21, I was the one they trusted to keep the floor running. This wasn't a job. It was inheritance in motion. I didn't ask to be CEO, but I never thought I'd be managed. I stood up. My chair didn't scrape. I adjusted the cuff of my shirt, straightened the sleeves, walked out of the boardroom with the same quiet steps I'd taken every day for 14 years. I didn't look at Ethan, didn't look at my father, just walked. Outside, one of the junior managers, Tyler, was standing by the water cooler. I'd coached him through a logistics crisis last December. He gave me a half nod. I returned nothing. The hallway still smelled like fresh paint from the remodel I'd overseen last quarter. A coat no one had asked for, but one the building needed. I passed reception. Kendra glanced up, then quickly looked away. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard like she'd forgotten what she was doing. My office was the same as always. Clean, precise, understated. I closed the door behind me and locked it. First time I'd done that in years. The server monitor was already on. My credentials still worked. I opened the back-end dashboard, navigated to internal ops, core sync, contract templates, vendor logic tree, hovered over the master scheduler, clicked end session. The system asked confirm. I clicked yes, once, then opened a script file labeled Temp Audit Backup July. I removed the schedule trigger, left the backup path blank, closed the tab, no alarms, no logs, all within standard. Admin permissions, opened my drawer, pulled out a small USB drive, plugged it in, transferred a folder labeled Legal Copies Personal into a hidden partition. 3 minutes. I waited for the green light, removed the drive, slipped it into the inner pocket of my jacket. Then I opened a different terminal, our vendor bridge, and paused 3 external data streams, not deleted, just paused. Enough to raise questions in 3 days. Next, I pulled open the top drawer of a cabinet labeled Archives. Inside was an old blueprint folder, hand-drawn specs from the company's founding. My grandfather's sketches. I took one, rolled it carefully, slid it into a tube, and locked it shut. I stood there for a second, then left. Past Ethan's new office, door half open. He was already on a call. That'll be my first priority as CEO. He didn't see me. The hallway felt longer on the way out. I passed the break room. Still had the sticker I'd put on the vending machine after it stole. $5 from the accounting intern, 2 years ago. She cried in the hallway. I bought her lunch. Nobody looked up as I passed. At the elevators, I pressed the button. Waited. The stainless steel doors reflected a tired face with too much control in it. I didn't blink. When they opened, I stepped in. Didn't press a button. Just stood there. Then turned the key in the panel and activated service mode. Elevator paused. I knelt down. Took out a small envelope from my jacket. Wrote 3 words in block print. Check next Tuesday. I left it on the floor, dead center, then exited through the service hatch. Down the stairwell. 1 flight, 2, 3. Into the old corridor. Unrenovated. Quiet. No cameras. That was my decision. 6 years ago. Too many blind spots in newer wings. I pushed the door open into the garage. The fluorescent light above my truck was still flickering from last week's outage. I'd logged the maintenance request myself. I unlocked the door. Sat inside. The seat still held the shape of my back. Started the engine. No music. No calls. No, just a straight drive out. I didn't look back. The photo was still framed on his desk. My father and I standing in front of the first plant after the expansion. My sleeves rolled, clipboard in hand, his hand on my shoulder. That day he said I'd be the one to take it further than he ever could. That was 2 years ago. Back then, we were walking the floor together every Monday at 6 a.m. He'd stop by maintenance first, talk to Saul, the oldest tech on staff. Then we'd inspect line 4 even if it wasn't flagged. Lines lie, he used to say. Floors don't. Ethan never joined us. Too early, he'd joke. Or he had a pitch deck to finalize, or a podcast meeting. The first time I noticed, something shift was subtle. My father asked me to present the quarterly logistics outlook, but Ethan stood at the front of the conference room when I walked in. He's just giving the intro, my father said without looking up. Ethan's intro took 12 minutes. After that, Ethan started showing up more. Quietly at first, sitting in on vendor calls, looping in analysts I hadn't approved. Once, I found a new distribution model draft in the shared folder. It wasn't mine, but it had my name on the metadata. Modified by Ethan. I didn't say anything. I believed in playing long. 3 months before the boardroom decision, I spent a weekend in Plant 5. One of the conveyors had been flagged for unbalanced loads. No one else volunteered. I brought coffee and worked beside Mel, a machine operator with arthritis in both hands. She said, "You're the only one who ever asks if I'm warm enough in here." I said nothing. Just adjusted the thermostat and handed her a heat pack. 2 weeks before the shift, I walked in on Ethan and my father mid-conversation in his office. Ethan had mock-ups open on his tablet, a rebranding package, new logo, new tagline. Row Group, it said. Agility, vision, speed. I stood in the doorway. My father cleared his throat. "We're just brainstorming," he said. That same day, the email from legal mentioned a change in bylaws. Subtle, but I noticed it. The new clause allowed for interim executive reassignment by a simple majority, with succession agility as justification. I archived it. Said nothing. A month earlier, one of our overseas suppliers threatened to break contract over shipping delays. I called in from the factory floor, boots still muddy from the inspection round. "Send them the April clause addendum," I told Denise in legal. She hesitated. "That only triggers on third-party interference." "It's in the manifest," I said. "Weather rerouted the cargo, qualifies." 2 hours later, the supplier backed off. Quietly. I didn't gloat. I didn't report it, but people noticed. At that logistics outlook meeting when Ethan opened with global redundancies, I saw 2 managers glance at me. He cited a figure, 16% drop in freight recovery time. I corrected him, 11.6. He laughed. Right. I rounded up. No one else did. The Sunday before it happened, I brought coffee to my father's porch. We used to do that once a month. He barely touched his. Talked about golf, the lake, the past. When I asked what the board was planning for Q3, he scratched his chin. "Let's not talk shop today. We always talk shop." The last Friday before it happened, I met Saul on the floor. He was tightening a faulty coupling. "You look tired," he said. "I'm fine." He stood up slowly, wiped his hands. "You've been watching the roof rot for too long, son. Sometimes it's not the water, it's who drilled the hole." That weekend, I took home a copy of the vendor performance reports and one of the old blueprint folders. I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I found myself sketching lines on a pad. Redesigns. Not for the company, for something else. I didn't know it yet, but I was already stepping out. On Monday, I held the door open for Ethan on the way into the building. He didn't say thanks, just walked ahead. That's when I knew. He already thought it was his. They stopped looping me in. It began with one meeting. A vendor audit. I'd been running those since 2014. This one? Scheduled on a calendar I didn't have access to. When I asked Ethan, he said, "Oh, I figured you were busy on the ops side." I wasn't. And he knew it. The next week, a contract renewal with our logistics carrier came through, with my digital signature on it, but I hadn't reviewed anything. Legal said it was pulled from a previous template under executive override. Ethan's override. I checked the logs. They were clean. He'd done it through admin proxy, a tool reserved for emergencies. No alarms. Nothing actionable. I took screenshots, saved them offline. The final quarterly report was published without my approval. I found out when Denise from finance forwarded me the PDF. Didn't know you'd signed off on this already. She wrote I hadn't. The numbers were real, but the projections were off. Optimistic, exaggerated. Ethan had embedded 3 slides about new leadership agility and generational transformation. My name didn't appear once. At home, I told no one. My wife asked if something was wrong. I said I was just tired, too. Night, I backed up all my files, cleared my work laptop's desktop, transferred admin access of one vendor portal to a neutral ops lead. On the surface, I still arrived at 7 a.m. Still walked the floor, still answered questions, but I was already fading from the walls. One afternoon, I walked past Conference B. Inside, Ethan stood beside our father, doing press photos, flashbulb, smile, handshake. The banner behind them read, agility, vision, speed. I kept walking. The following Thursday, I passed by Conference Room D. It used to be mine to schedule. Inside, a dozen department heads were discussing the Q3 ops rollout. My name wasn't on the invite. I paused, looked through the glass. Brad, the logistics manager, caught my eye, then looked away. He used to run every model past me. That night, I came home to a quiet house. My wife had left a plate on the table, chicken and rice. I sat down, ate 2 bites. She walked in from the hallway, drying her hands. You're home late. Long day, I said. She nodded, kissed my forehead. You're doing your best. I didn't reply. I just went to the garage and stared at the old generator I rebuilt with my father in 2009. The casing was rusted now, but it still worked. The next morning, Ethan hosted a cross-department call. I wasn't invited, but I listened from a conference room nearby. He was presenting my model, the predictive ops tool I'd built in 2020. He changed the name. Left out the attribution. Called it a row-next framework. One of the interns asked about the baseline dataset. Ethan said, "We're still evaluating." I turned off the speaker. Later that day, the press photographer stopped me in the hallway. "You want to jump in for a quick shot with the team?" I shook my head. "I'm good." She looked confused. "You're Lucas, right?" I smiled once. "Used to be." That night, I went to the attic, pulled down the old wooden box my grandfather had left me after his retirement. Inside, a pocket, compass, a warranty card, a rusted stopwatch with initials scratched into the back. The hands were frozen at 6:47. Below it all, an envelope. Inside was a single typed page. "There will come a day when silence speaks louder than warning. That's the day to listen." I folded the paper, placed it beside my blueprint folder. On the morning of the vote, I looked at my reflection and said nothing. At the office, my badge still worked. Upstairs, the boardroom door was open. Ethan glanced, back, half a smirk on his face. My father didn't look at me. From the hall, I could hear Ethan say, "It's already decided. He just doesn't know it yet." I walked in and closed the door behind me. The vote was unanimous. Ethan slid the paper toward me. "We're glad you'll stay on to support the transition." I nodded once. Didn't speak. He extended his hand. I looked at it, then at my father. He looked out the window. I stood, walked out, closed the door. That night, I opened the shared archive, the one no one used anymore. In a folder labeled P5 Legacy Backups, I uploaded 3 files: vendor deviation records, invoice discrepancies, and the freight manipulation reports. Each file was named in Ethan's preferred naming format, each cross-checked with timestamps from his calendar. Then I removed access for everyone but legal. No alerts were triggered. It looked like a cleanup. 3 days later, Denise called me from a private line. "You didn't send this to me, did you?" I said nothing. They're panicking upstairs. I didn't smile, just thanked her. The next day, the first meeting was canceled. Then a press inquiry was redirected. By Friday, Ethan had booked an emergency session with finance and legal. Wasn't invited, but someone left the door ajar. Ethan's voice was sharp, defensive, then loud. "He's trying to sabotage us." "No, Ethan," someone replied. "He's documenting everything." Silence. That weekend, I drove out to the second plant. The security guard let me in without a word. I walked the perimeter, the dry dock, the tool cages, the old locker rooms, with the outdated safety posters. I left a single manila envelope in the back office drawer, marked for review. Inside, 6 signed vendor memos, all predated, all verifiable, all showing operational misconduct under Ethan's name. By Monday morning, the CFO had resigned. By Monday afternoon, our lead auditor recused himself. That night, I received a message on Signal. "You're overplaying it. Don't forget whose name is still on the door." It wasn't signed, but I knew. I archived it. The next morning, I found my access revoked. Badge failed. Email locked. HR called a security incident. A courier delivered my termination letter. No explanation. They moved fast, but I'd already moved faster. At home, I didn't mention the termination. My wife placed 2 mugs on the table, hers, and one for me. I left mine untouched. Later that evening, she found my badge on the counter. She didn't ask. She just sat beside me on the porch and said, "You didn't deserve this." I nodded once. That was enough. The next morning, I stopped by Brad's auto shop, the one he ran on the side. We hadn't talked in weeks. He looked up from the hood of a pickup. "They kicked you out?" I didn't answer. He wiped his hands. On a rag. "Ethan's been sloppy. Everyone knows it. Most of us just kept quiet because it felt like the tide shifted." He handed me a folder. "Found this in the shipping logs. You might want it." Inside, altered manifests. Routing orders that didn't match supplier inputs. I took it without a word. That afternoon, I drove to the Row Group downtown office, the smaller one, leased under a legacy division. My name was still on the door there. Inside the cabinet, I retrieved a backup drive, one I hadn't used in 5 years. It held the original code base for our ops platform, the one Ethan had rebranded. I left the office empty-handed, but not empty. That night, I sat in my truck under the rain. Engine off. Wipers idle. The drive was in my jacket. My phone was in the glove box. I didn't touch it. I just waited until the light flicked on in the office across the street, a quiet signal. Then I stepped out and crossed. By midweek, internal chatter had shifted. Denise forwarded me an anonymized memo circulating among mid-level managers. It raised concerns about financial misalignments and recent deviations from standard oversight. She added no comment. Just the subject line, "You started something." The old procurement lead, Harold, on long retired, called me unexpectedly. "Lucas," he said, "I've seen this before. Fast-talking air, cutting corners, pushing optics over ops." He paused. "I kept the original vendor reviews from the 2018 cycle. Ethan had them purged, but I have hard copies." I drove out to Harold's place that evening. He handed me a cardboard box, sealed and dated. "Do what your father wouldn't." I took it without a word. Meanwhile, Ethan began, shifting the narrative. A leaked interview draft positioned him as revolutionizing a legacy operation burdened by rigidity. He framed my departure as a mutually agreed transition, while quietly briefing partners to expect a cleaner, faster Row. The line caught fire on LinkedIn. I printed a copy and pinned it to the inside of my toolbox. 2 days later, someone slashed my truck tires. No theft, no message. The police filed a report, called it random. I didn't. That same night, I received a burner call. Masked number. Voice disguised. "You're not the future, Lucas. Back off." I said nothing. The call ended in under 10 seconds. I responded without noise. I compiled every document, every record, every pattern of manipulation, override, silencing. Then I submitted an anonymous tip to the state regulatory board, with timestamps, emails, names encrypted, verified, trace-free. I also sent a copy to one private inbox, not Ethan's, our largest investors. Then I turned off my phone and waited. It started with a question at the investor meeting. A woman from Hartwell Capital, our second largest stakeholder, asked for clarification on vendor consolidation procedures. She cited data from the past 2 quarters. The room shifted. Ethan stammered something about streamlining logistics. Then the chair of the board asked, "Are those projections based on the Row-Nex framework?" She nodded. He turned to Ethan. "Can you walk us through the baseline data set used?" Ethan blinked. I'd have to pull that." The chair leaned back. "I think you should." Outside, a notification popped up on my phone. A public filing from the State Commerce Board. Notice of review. Row Industrial Group. Under it, 2 words. Operational irregularities. I didn't post anything. I didn't call anyone. But over the next 48 hours, 3 partners paused negotiations. A client froze a distribution deal, and one of Ethan's LinkedIn posts disappeared. That Friday, I received a letter by certified mail. It wasn't from Row Industrial, it was from their outside counsel. Inside, a formal retraction of my termination, pending internal investigation. No apology, no explanation, just formality. I folded it once, set it on the counter, didn't touch it again. The board called an emergency session. I wasn't invited, but Harold was. He walked in with the 2018 vendor box, sat it on the table, then said, "Before you vote, you'll want to see this." Inside the boardroom, the silence thickened. Ethan shuffled a few papers, then said, "We've been correcting some outdated practices. The baseline data will be available post-cycle." One of the partners, I knew him, had worked with him, on the original logistics algorithm, leaned forward. "Ethan, is it true the 2022 vendor projections were manually overridden without audit trail?" Ethan blinked. We adjusted projections based on the momentum." A pause. That's not an answer. Then came the pivot. Ethan stood. "Look, part of the challenge has been legacy systems, legacy mindsets. I've been trying to modernize a company built on inertia." He let it hang. My father flinched. The room didn't shift with him. The chair of the board narrowed his eyes. "Legacy mindsets, are you referring to your brother?" Ethan paused. "Not directly." "Good, because he built half the architecture you're standing on." After the session, I got a call. Unknown number. The voice said, "They want to see you. Not to fix it, just to end it properly." I agreed. We met at a neutral office downtown. Just me and the chairman. He offered me a coffee. I declined. "I didn't call you here to change your mind," he said. "But you should know. You didn't just expose a liability. You preserved the company's name." I nodded once. He handed me a letter. Handwritten. I didn't read it there. Just folded it and put it in my coat. Back at Brad's, he raised an eyebrow. "So, what now?" I looked at the old Row Group mug on his shelf, a promo from 2008. My design. "I'm not going back. You could run it better." "Maybe." He waited, then asked, "So why not?" I looked at the mug again. It wasn't a job, it was mine. They made that clear. I wasn't there when the vote was called. But I heard later, from Brad, from Denise, from others, that Ethan didn't say a word when they asked him to step out. My father abstained. He didn't fight for me. But he didn't defend Ethan either. The next day I received another envelope. Inside, a formal invitation to return as interim COO while a transition review took place. This time it came with a handwritten note from the chair. "Some legacies don't need to be rebranded. They just need to be respected." I folded the paper, stared at it for a moment, then slid it into the back of my toolbox, behind the specs, behind the prints, and closed the lid. 3 days later, Ethan cleared his desk. No press release, no announcement. He left the building through the back exit. I watched from across the street. Didn't wave. Didn't move. That night, my wife asked if I was going back. I shook my head. I'm not building for people who forgot what I built. She didn't press. We just sat in the quiet. I didn't say goodbye to anyone, didn't pack my desk, didn't post. I went home, opened the garage, pulled the tarp off the lathe I hadn't used in years, and started turning something real again. 3 months later, I signed the lease on a small industrial lot on the west end of town. Nothing fancy. Concrete floors, one office, a loading dock that hadn't been used in years. But it was mine. Clients came in quiet at first. One from a supplier who'd left Row Group, another from a logistics firm that had heard I was back in the game, even if I hadn't said it out loud. They didn't want branding. They wanted results, and I gave them that. I worked in silence. No suits, no boardrooms, just designs, machines, and clear deliverables. The first 6-figure contract came before the second month closed. The second brought a retainer. By the end of the quarter, I'd hired 2 techs and a junior ops lead, all people the old company had laid off under Ethan's agile transition. One morning I found my old office mug in a box labeled shop rags. I rinsed it out, kept it on the shelf, not for memory, just balance. My wife brought lunch that day. She didn't say anything about the place, just smiled when she saw the production board almost full. Before closing that night, I screwed a new sign onto the entry door. Black letters. Simple font. Row, Precision Systems. No tagline, no legacy. Just the name. Built new. I locked up, rolled down the dock shutter, set. The alarm. The night air smelled clean, and I realized they gave the company to my brother. I built one they can't take. The gentleman's revenge isn't loud, but it's always personal. If this felt personal, make it personal. Subscribe now, and don't miss tomorrow's story.